outlaw trans women in female prisons. We got out of 27 people, 13 said yes to outlaw it, 11 said no, and 3 said undecided. So that was wildly close call. And I think it could be interesting if we figure out, at least amongst the 6 of us here, why cases where it would be different or not different. So I personally, personally voted yes to outlaw it, but I think it's complicated, and I think there's stipulations where it should be fine. And my go-to example is someone like Blair White. The look of Blair White, if she was to go murder somebody and go to prison, and because she was born male, she had to go to a male prison, this would be devastating. This should not happen. But at the same point, the idea of putting people that were born male with fully functioning penises into women's prisons, that seems devastating. So let's go ahead and talk it out and see if we can figure out if we should phrase what I said better, and or sorry, not what I said, but if we can phrase the law that's being proposed better, and maybe we need to faction it off into like 3 different types of laws or caveats for the laws. So let's see who has not talked in a little while. Let's go ahead and Harley, are you busy with food, or do you have a sec to be next to talk?
Well, I have a second to opine because I like to sound my own voice. I will say that I've got my pizzas ready now, so I don't know if anyone can see the beauty.
Nice. Oh, 2 of them.
There you go. Yes, one normal cheese and one pepperoni. Yeah, I think so. I was one of the no's, and I was one of the unqualified no's on that particular topic. I think that when you're discussing about, there's a balance to strike, as you say, the people like Blair White who perhaps wouldn't aesthetically be appropriate in a men's prison, and perhaps you could have a qualification in the law that these people were to be put in separate prisons. However, I think that generally speaking, the types of people who get in prison and who are imprisoned for crime, particularly on the more masculine side, the male side, it's a function of aggression. And so I think you have this situation where you have one person who looks like Blair White going into a male prison, and that might cause, certain concerns, versus the fact that you have every trans woman, male, being of a physical, not an aesthetic, but a physical concern within a female space. And so I think the only qualification personally that I would accept would be a qualification where you create a third category, a third prison, an isolated wing, whatever else it might be. But I don't think, as a general rule, you should be allowing and making accommodations for men to go into female spaces, particularly female prisons, and particularly female prisons because these are people who have been convicted of a crime, and I think are due less consideration for their preferences, basically, because ultimately they prefer not to be in prison. So
yeah. I want to ask you one more question because I know you got to get onto your pizza. I agree about the third category, but what makes me think that's interesting about this, because we wouldn't want Blair White to be in a men's prison because of the harm that can come to Blair White, but then it makes me wonder if we should have different categories for people based on their size. Like if 95% of people in prison are super muscular, like gangstery type people, and then 5% are like just scrawny little string bean dudes that committed fraud from their company, and they're not like violent people. Do we need a section for them to not be basically have beaten within an inch of their life? Do you have a quick thought on that, Harley? And then after that, I'm going to hop over.
Yeah, I think the reality. I think the reality is that probably it's about how you run your prisons rather than about the types of bodies that you put into those prisons. And if you have prisons that are managed properly, taking account of both the needs of both the male and female population, then it doesn't matter whether you've got some scrawny guy who goes in there in the male population, because you have appropriate policing for that. I think if you have this kind of ranking system, then what you end up with is potentially, Serena Williams ending up in the male prison and some scrawny dude ending up in the female one. And so I don't think just a physical analysis like that really works. I think it has to be down to the biology, really.
Okay. And then, Harley, if you feel like you got to hop off because of food, that's fine. Or you can eat pizza while talking, either way. But it's good talking to you, man.
No, I've got to pop off.
Okay. We'll get you on the next one. See you later. Okay, Travis, what are your thoughts on the I can't remember which way you voted, but what are your thoughts on the trans situation? Should there be a third wing of each of the male and female prisons for trans people so they aren't harmed? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I voted undecided just because it's not an issue I've really thought about. One thing I did think of, though, is like if you have trans people who have already gotten bottom surgery, I feel it would be kind of strange to put them in the men's prison.
Okay. One argument that I've heard on that topic, which I agree with you in a sense, and something like testosterone levels and surgery should have some kind of an effect on it. But I've also heard of situations where, not that it's common with like sports stuff, but if there's like somebody that's like a like mixed martial arts type person who gets the surgery and the and has like the estrogen level or the testosterone levels down, they still like might have more muscle mass or like larger hands, this type of thing. So just the ability of strength. But in my mind, even though I have concerns, I think, Travis, I line up with what you just said, where I would want to see the outcome. If they've had the surgery, then let them choose. And then if after that, there's like some weird stats where the born males are physically harming the born females, then we would reevaluate. But I would guess there wouldn't be an issue. Jeremy, what are your thoughts?
I think the big part of a big part of the issue right now is that is the general principle on the political left that trans status is nothing more than a matter of personal self-identification, which leads to the potential for anybody to lie. Any criminal who just wants to go into a prison situation that's going to be easier for them can just arbitrarily declare that they realized that they were trans that very same day that they were convicted. And I mean, that's definitely part of the argument from the people who are not on the left, who oppose the idea of trans women in women's prisons, is just that a lot of them are just going to actually be cis men who are lying to get an easier situation. So
the problem with that is that people have already tried to do that and it doesn't pan out. Like there was a mass shooter whose lawyer decided that would be a good bid and it got shot down. There's like there's defining lines for that. How long have you been on the estrogen? How long have you done this? Have you committed to it? Have you gotten surgeries? Like part of the reason the estrogen is a consideration is because estrogen, once you take it long enough, decimates your muscle and bone mass. That's why when you look at like sports statistics over the past 50 or so years that we've been tracking them for trans people, there's no general like overachievement. They always achieve on par or under, and there's a couple of instances that get blown up, like Leah Thomas, that kind of go above that, but it's pretty rare. That's why they take that into consideration. So any old Tom, Dick, and Harry that shoots up a school or something and goes like, "Oh, well, actually, I'm a woman," they are not getting into the women's prison because they haven't been kneecapped by the estrogen yet.
Yeah, that's one of the key points. The other key point, everybody should be talking about is that the obscenity of the open tolerance of sexual assault and other forms of assault in prisons.
In women prisons, it's a really big problem with male guards.
Male guards.
Because of the power imbalance. There's like pregnant women
Yeah.
in women's prisons who get raped by the
Oh,
guards
yeah.
a lot.
Oh yeah, but just in general, retributivism is a crazy and evil philosophical position, and and the way that it pans out in
An eye for an eye makes
And-
the whole world blind.
in our prison culture, and even to the extent that it's a cliched joke among the general public that, and you go to prison, you're going to get raped. It's vile. We can't talk about policies like who goes to what prison without talking about this vile system in America right now that doesn't exist to this nearly same extent in many other countries.
Yeah. Luckily with this society we're creating, even though we can, so far it's decided that we can look at stats in the U.S. if outcomes are affecting how we vote. It's also a brand new society, so we can imagine nobody's in prison, and when they go to prison, that we don't have the situation where people are raped in those ways. But we can bring those in as we need new topics to go over. But yeah, well, Phil, let's get your thoughts on this topic.
Well, I remember I had a dilemma when I went to go write it because I felt like what I really wanted was a separate prison for cisgender females, transgender females, cisgender males, and transgender males, to be all in separate populations. But while was it Harley? While Harley was speaking, you touched on a point that I kind of think could replace that, perhaps, and perhaps I'm wrong, and that is you have put people in categories, which we kind of still do already in prisons, of like, there's maximum security, there's more prisons and areas for more dangerous people. You need to keep some of the weaker and less dangerous people away from the stronger and more dangerous people. I don't know exactly how to do that, but my initial instinct is to have 4 different categories rather than just male and female.
Okay.
Something else occurs to me, which is that maybe it seems like there's some science to back up the idea that all male or male dominated social interactions are close to the essence of the problem. Lack of female influence is part of the problem with creation of violent cultures. And so from a standpoint of rehabilitation, maybe our whole completely segregated prison system is flawed in that respect. And a big part of male violent criminals rehabilitation might be, regular controlled interaction with a diverse group of females.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that'd be interesting. Okay, let's. I'm curious to hear, Eric, if you have any argument for if there was an idea, because I mean, prisons are kind of sectioned off, anyways. Kind of like, you have the worst offenders in this certain area. You have certain people that don't even come in contact with guards because they're so likely to be violent to guards. So if you do have sections where you have one building that is sectioned off into like, let's say 30% of it is born males, 30% of it's born females, and then 20% of it, well, anyways, percent doesn't matter, but you have sections where you have the trans males in one section, trans females in another section, and then cis of each in the other categories. Do you have any reason to be against the existence of this, even if you don't think it's necessary?
Well, a big part of the problem that I would have with it is that when it is attempted, at least in the real world, it usually just devolves into, we're going to put you all in solitary confinement because we don't want to build another wing on the prison. Solitary confinement does so much damage to a person. Like, the Quakers outlawed it centuries ago. Like, it's not something we should even lean towards.
Well, let's just say if it's our society.
My biggest problem is that there's just not enough trans people going to prison to justify a whole area, right? Like, We know that generally they're not that big of a problem in Gen Pop. They can be, but it's important to keep people's social faculties working, to keep them in Gen Pop, keep them on the art. The kind of people that
Sure.
don't get to do that are the kind of people who already don't have good social faculties and they have to be worked back into it, or they're just in prison forever. I don't really particularly like that idea very much. It's social ostracization leads to a lot of problems. It can lead to antisocial issues. It can cause like not nihilism. It can cause like well, antisocial. As much as I don't like to repeat it, but like antisocial issues where people start to form like really hateful feelings towards other people. They start to shun people. It can cause depression. It can cause a lot of problems, really. There's not just, I haven't heard a very strong argument for putting them in their own wing, because that's what they used to do with gay inmates, and it turned out that that was actually really, really bad for them. I usually look to, I think it's Norway or Finland for their prison systems where they have actual mattresses. They can get a TV. They can have a cat if they're not violent to animals. They teach them how to drive. They give them
Yeah.
they give them like social skills and things like that, so they can be reintegrated.
I think it'd be amazing to get into ideas of what we think could be good for how our prisons work. But just as far as the trans thing goes, I think it'll be interesting to break that down.
You've talked to me enough to know that you have to cut me off, or I'm going to ramble.
That's
forever.
true. I do.
Eric,
Yeah.
also with respect to what Eric just said, also much lower sentences, even for
That's true as well.
even for serious violent crimes. The U.S. Sentencing standards are really long. They're too long, and then in addition to that, we have this culture that generally people commenting on our very long sentences think that they're not long enough. There's like this out of control retributivist culture in the U.S.
I want to put a pin in that. I want to put a pin in that real quick. Obviously, that's not the topic right now, but I do want to mention although I'm not retributivist at all, right? Completely against that. I am in favor of one of the valid functions of imprisonment is keeping criminals away from the rest of society, at least for a period. So I'm not really one who thinks that retribution works, and I'm not one who thinks that rehabilitation works much either. So one can, I knew you'd say that. So one can be in favor of longer sentences without approaching it from a retributive angle.
So Phil, I think I say this all the time as a teacher that the same error is made in the education world as in the criminal justice world, which is thinking that the effects of just somebody getting older and their body and brain changing as a result of biology is the handiwork of either the teacher or the prison system. So I agree with you that rehabilitation doesn't often work very well in terms of like the specific policies that the prison decides to adopt. Similarly, like when a 10-year-old is able to do much more than a 7-year-old, it's mostly not the result of the amazing educational methods used by their teachers. It's mostly the fact that the 10-year-old brain can do a whole lot more than the 7-year-old brain could. And so the reason, part of the reason why we don't need super long prison sentences, as long as our prisons aren't like petri dishes for gangs and for violence to be learned and increased, as long as they're relatively peaceful places. Somebody who goes in at 18 and comes out at 28 is just biologically, developmentally not going to be prone to the same level of violence as they were when their brain was at a much earlier stage of development. And their hormones are more settled down and things like that. So that's part of the reason for letting people out. It's not that we have amazing rehabilitation methods, but just that, usually there's something going on with somebody's brain that if you just kind of take them away from things for a while, they're not going to be the same person they were.
Absolutely.
I'm going to make a quick note of one of the first things we can get into once we get everything ironed out is prison sentences, and so that'll be something that we can have as pretty early on in this project. But okay, so I think what I'm going to do is get from everybody in the group, instead of just saying should born males be in or not be in the prison, I think I will specifically ask based on the bottom surgery element or not, and then also ask if people think there should be a separate wing for it as well. And
I have a thought that I'd like to jump in on the last thing they said about rehabilitation, if you don't mind.
I would prefer to hold off on that just because it's just not part of anything that we're like voting on or part of the society yet. But if you just have like a really quick, like 1 minute or less
it's a
thing,
quick
go
one.
for it. Okay.
So the reason that rehabilitation works in prisons for adults, and the data shows it out, is because most people who commit crimes are committing crimes out of desperation. Most violent crimes, most theft, those things are tied to people not having opportunities to make it in the world, or they're raised in places where they don't have those opportunities. Like a lot of the places with the most violent crimes in America are places that don't have businesses and job opportunities. So people have to turn to other things to make money. So when you give them job skills and you teach them how to drive or how to do certain things, use work programs, teach them how to properly socialize with other people, teach them to care about themselves, generally that turns out really well. Rehabilitation works on people who are older or younger. As long as you can give them the skills to actually make it in the world without having to turn to crime, most people aren't going to choose crime. That's just generally seems to be the way it turns out.
Okay. All right, and then we can bring that back up when we talk about this later. I wanted to ask Travis a question really quick on the trans thing before we get out of this. So Travis, imagine we decide for our society that our prisons will have 4 gendered sections. So we have cis male, cis female, trans man, trans woman. We have these categories exist. In your opinion, if these categories exist and that's where people go, if a trans woman has had bottom surgery, would you be in favor of letting her choose between being in the trans woman section or the regular woman section, or would you want her to specifically be in the trans woman section?
I guess I would give her the option.
And then, okay, and then Phil, a quick question for you. Do you think it should be up to the person to choose if they are the potential victim themselves? So letting a trans woman that has a functioning penis be in a woman's section is putting the other people at risk. But what if it was the other way around, where it was and this is probably the rarest thing in the world, is that a trans man will commit a crime. But if a trans man commits a crime and the possible victim is them being a man that has a vagina going in a man's prison, if they say, I know the possibility, I can get raped, I don't care, that's where I want to be, should we allow them to choose because the person choosing is the only potential victim, or should we protect them with our knowledge of possible pregnancy or whatever and put them in that 4th wing that is a trans man wing?
This isn't something I feel particularly strongly about, but I would say you'd still want them in the 4th wing. If that's the way it's set up, you'd probably want to stick to the plan.
Okay, cool. And so I think that I'll set up something that people can vote on in 2 different sections. I kind of, now that it's such a close call that it was the votes were 13-11 and 2 undecided on the trans prison thing. I want to find out how many people think that we should have 4 sections, and then also how many people are accepting of trans women that have had surgery being in the normal section. So there's a couple ideas there.